North Korea, a modern-day family-ruled socialist dystopia, is a place where a casual complaint about food shortage can earn you a lifetime in a prison camp. We who live in the free world might wonder, why don't those 25 million people just rise and overthrow the oppressive Kim regime? After all, history is full of tyrants toppled by fed-up citizens. From Louis XVI to Nicholas II and Nicolae Ceausescu, authoritative great men have repeatedly discovered that the rule of fear has an expiration date. And yet, when it comes to North Korea, we hear nothing. No mass protests, no popular uprisings, no revolutionary movements spilling into the streets. So, why? You may think, surely someone at some point must have tried to do something disobedient. After all, history suggests that when enough people are hungry, angry, and armed with farm tools, something typically happens. And despite all the famine and repression, the kingdom never had even one single successful uprising. No barricades, no stormed palaces, not even a strongly worded petition. If there is any revolutionary spirit somewhere in the kingdom, it must be extremely well hidden. The 70-plus years of the Kim rule have taught us that maintaining one of the world's most oppressive regimes isn't just about brute force, but the secret art of governance. The Kim regime has engineered North Korean society with a diabolical thoroughness, creating conditions where rebellion is not only suicidal, but unthinkable. Here is a nation of people, trapped in a high-security mental and physical prison, where all precursors for revolution have been methodically stripped away. In this episode, we'll break down 5 key reasons why North Koreans don't revolt against the Kims. We'll examine how trust between people has been systematically destroyed, and how even hunger itself has been weaponized as a tool of control. And before we go on, a brief note of thanks. This channel is supported by our loyal members, whose backing makes our research and production possible. So buckle up, or, as a North Korean might say, tighten your belt. Let's dig in.
Where Kim Jong-un is unable to threaten the United States of America with a nuclear weapon.
I understand that. So are you saying now you don't favor regime change?
Senator, I have never advocated for regime change. I have all along.
It's a simple question. So you don't believe.
I'm happy to answer today that I'm not advocating for regime change. Yes, Senator.
Thank you.
Every successful revolution begins with a radical, dangerous idea: trust. You must truly trust that the person next to you hates the system as much as you do, and trust that your comrades won't report you to the authority. To successfully rule, the Kims designed a social structure that made trust extinct in North Korea. Imagine living in a country where your best friend, your neighbor, and your lovely auntie could all be informants or secret police. Well, they likely won't all snitch. But in a system like this, probability guarantees that someone nearby eventually does. In the Kingdom, this worry isn't paranoia, but good situational awareness. The state operates a dense, multi-layered web of surveillance that reaches into every block, staircase, and kitchen table. Privacy does not exist, but any independent thought is treated as an antisocial behavior. Casual conversation is never casual when a poorly phrased joke can earn you a lifetime in a labor camp, plus a bonus sentence for your parents and children. Yes, they punish your 3 generations under the guilt by association system. Your big mouth and bad words can function like a family heirloom, passed lovingly down to your grandchildren. With stakes like that, trusting another human and expressing your revolutionary thought became a calculated act of self-destruction. At the center of this system is the Inmin ban, a neighborhood organization best described as HOA meets secret police. Every 20 to 40 households are grouped together under an appointed leader, usually a middle-aged woman with unwavering devotion to the party and unique hobbies of gossiping and peeking through neighbors' windows. Her job is simple: know every aspect of your life: who visited whom, who stayed at whose house overnight, who looked insufficiently inspired during yesterday's ideological lecture. She reports to his leader twice a day, once in the morning to receive instructions, and once in the evening to deliver gossip professionally. Just in case that isn't enough, the state also inserts extra undercover informants whose only job is to spy on the Inmin ban leader herself. Yes, even the spies are being spied on. It's Inception in the DPRK style. The result is a society where everyone automatically assumes they are being watched, because they usually are. And when they aren't, someone is failing at their job. This paranoia is gradually cultivated throughout your life. North Koreans are required to attend regular self-criticism sessions. Think about group therapy, except the goal is humiliation and mutual destruction. Participants must confess ideological mistakes and frequently denounce themselves and others. When they catch you doing something and you fail to manifest your regret, you're suspicious. And when you fail to criticize someone else, it then makes you complicit. Either way, congratulations, you have earned more attention from Big Brother. Even children are drafted into this system, encouraged to report classmates for ideological missteps. Friendship is tolerated only at the level of shallow pleasantries and safe slogans. Unapproved gatherings, even classroom activities, are considered suspicious. So when a kid grows up, the regime ensures that distrust has been implanted into his genes. Thus, it's hard to overthrow the government when whispering, "This place is terrible," to your spouse carries the risk of a midnight door knock. In North Korea, the greatest enemy of rebellion isn't tanks or soldiers. It's the quiet, ever-present fear that the person listening is already writing the report. What comes after the report? It could be your new life in a prison camp. Fear of horrific punishment is the glue that holds this entire system of distrust together. North Korea's system of penalties is not only harsh, but deliberately medieval. A single report of anti-regime sentiment can make a person vanish into a Kwan Lee So, the political labor camp so brutal that survival is often measured in weeks, not years. Torture, starvation, and execution are not abstract ideas, but on-the-ground practices. And the regime makes sure everyone knows it and learn their lessons. The threat of these camps hangs permanently over the population, enforcing obedience without the need for actual violence. Think of it as Pavlov's dog experiment, except the bell is the secret police, and the reward is not food, but continued existence. Faced with that silence or disappearance calculus, most people choose the only rational option and bury their dangerous thoughts in the deepest pit of the heart. In this atmosphere, forming a revolutionary group is nearly impossible. To have a reasonable force, whom would you recruit? Your high school buddy who joined the military for a full belly? Your co-worker who is curious about your political thoughts? Even among those who privately despise the regime, everyone is trapped in a permanent prisoner's dilemma. Any one of them might snitch first, either to protect themselves or to earn small rewards from the state, like some extra food, lighter scrutiny, and a temporary sense of safety. The safest strategy is always the same: say nothing, believe nothing, reveal nothing. Defectors repeatedly report that they had no one, not a friend, not a sibling, not even a spouse, they could safely confide in about their doubts or hopes for change. This total collapse of social trust is the regime's first and most effective line of defense. A population that cannot trust itself cannot unite against anything. In the end, North Korean society resembles a circular firing squad. Everyone is forced to aim at everyone else, so no one dares move. It's 1984, but with better paperwork and worse consequences. Under these conditions, expecting a popular uprising is like expecting prisoners to plan a jailbreak when every cellmate might be a snitch. Here, social distrust isn't a flaw, but the foundation of the kingdom.
Climbing back to the sacred revolutionary mountain, Kim Il-sung said with deep emotion, "Whenever I climb Mount Baekdur, I think of Comrade Kim Jong-il. Mount Baekdur is his birthplace and the cradle where he nurtured his courage. He is a man of the Mount Baekdur type. He was born with a mountain's spirit and is the mountain's symbol."
Okay, let's presume you pass the test of trust. What's next? At this point, the aspiring rebel faces the next difficulty: a complete lack of cultural tradition and framework for popular uprising. Historically, North Koreans have never been given the tools, the language, or the permission to envision people-powered revolt. In countries where folk heroes are revolutionaries and civil disobedience is part of the national story, mass resistance feels like a natural possibility. In the kingdom, the idea of the people rising up on their own sounds as foreign as iPhones and obesity. The Korean peninsula has a long Confucian tradition, emphasizing hierarchy, obedience, and loyalty to authority. Back to 500+ years of the Joseon dynasty, ordinary Koreans didn't exactly hold regular protest rallies against the king. That concept just didn't exist. Then came Japanese colonial rule, when any independent mind was brutally repressed. Any hint of dissent was crushed by the Japanese military police. The Koreans technically didn't free themselves through revolutions and guerrilla warfare, but because the Allies forced Japan to surrender. Then, the collapse of the Japanese Empire immediately led to the Soviet-style takeover under Kim Il-sung's dictatorship in the north, and the American-style takeover under Syngman Rhee's dictatorship in the south. So at no point in North Korea's recent history was there a successful grassroots rebellion to form an independent government, or even a culture of civil society activism to draw inspiration from. South Korea experienced student uprisings and pro-democracy movements in the 80s, but in the North, such democratization is delusional. North Koreans today do not have even a rudimentary civil society that can become a basis for resistance. No churches, no non-governmental cultural associations, no civic groups. It's a blank slate about the culture of public organizing. You can't build a people's revolution on a foundation that never existed. Consider the role of independent institutions in fomenting change elsewhere. In many societies, churches, labor unions, universities, or underground newspapers have been breeding grounds for dissent. In North Korea, all such venues have been eliminated or co-opted by the state. Religion, for example, was effectively wiped out or forced deep underground. The regime literally replaced God with Kim Il-sung. There are no free trade unions, no opposition parties, no town hall debates, no independent student unions. Every organization, from the Women's League to the Youth League, is an arm of the ruling Workers' Party, explicitly designed to reinforce state ideology and watch its members for deviance. In short, North Koreans have zero experience in collective action apart from state-organized organizations. They know how to march in parades with placards praising the supreme leader, but they had never held a protest march demanding his removal. The regime ensures that North Koreans' only model of people power is the kind where the people shout in unison in favor of the status quo. The very language and narratives available to North Koreans leave no room for revolt. The idea of an uprising is so absurd that only a crazy maniac or a secret foreign agent would think of it. From kindergarten onward, citizens are taught that they live in a harmonious society, united single-heartedly behind the leader. The heroes in North Korean lore are soldiers defending the fatherland or loyal workers fulfilling the leader's plan, never common people challenging authority. The only acceptable uprising in official history is Kim Il-sung's guerrilla struggle against the evil colonizers, though, to be fair, he primarily fought the Japanese in China, not Korea. Crucially, those narratives cast the Kims as the only legitimate leaders of any resistance against evil capitalists and imperialists. In other words, the regime has monopolized the very notion of revolution. Revolution is something done by the Kim, not against the Kim. Further, decades of terror have extinguished even the embers that might spark a revolt. North Koreans have been terrorized for decades. It's not just that they fear punishment, though with no doubt everybody absolutely does, but also that they don't have examples of successful resistance to look to. In Eastern Europe, people could look back on the strikes in Poland or the protests in Prague. In South Korea, people remember the April 19 movement or the June struggle that brought democracy. Ask a North Korean about historical uprisings, and all they know is scratching their head. Some people claim about several isolated mutinies or plots within the North Korean military in the 90s, but these were brutally eradicated before they ever reached the public. The population at large either never heard of them or only heard they were spies or traitors who got what they deserved. Here is your takeaway. Nobody rebels in the Kimdom and lives to tell the tale. For North Koreans, Martin Luther King, Lech Wałęsa, and Mandela never existed in their consciousness. The regime has effectively deleted any role models for dissent. And then there's Songbun, North Korea's charming caste system that assigns every citizen a loyalty score based on how heroic or problematic their ancestors were. The hostile class has been marginalized, watched extra carefully, and kept impoverished, since they're the last people who could organize anything. The core loyal class enjoys slightly better treatment and has a stake in the system, which could be some extra food rations or the privilege of living in a flat in Pyongyang. They're the only ones with enough resources to even think beyond survival, but they're also the ones indoctrinated to be most loyal. This two-pronged approach means the people most likely to desire change have the least capability to do anything about it, while those with a bit more freedom of action are carefully selected for their devotion. Top military officers and officials are chosen for slavish loyalty and tightly surveilled by one another. So, to recap, no civil society, no independent institutions, no role models for rebellion, and a caste system designed to split the angry from the capable. North Korea is what you get when you delete the concept of protest from the human operating system. Even if someone wanted to rise up, they wouldn't know how or with whom to rise up. The concept of people power has been surgically removed from the national consciousness. Expecting a spontaneous uprising in North Korea is like expecting a flower to grow in concrete. There's no soil. And the regime has spent decades salting the earth.
I don't think Kim Jong-un is ever going to give up, and we need to think about regime change in North Korea, either driven by the U.S. or the message needs to be to the Chinese, driven by you.
Of course, fear and distrust alone don't keep a regime in power forever. To stop people from rising up, you also have to convince them there's nothing to rise up for. Rebellion requires imagination, some vision of a better life, or at least the knowledge that such a thing might exist. This is why oppressive regimes often try to isolate their citizens from the outside world. North Korea, unfortunately, excels in the art of isolation. It's not just physical, but mental and informational isolation on a colossal scale. This is full-spectrum, state-sponsored reality control, a kind of political sensory deprivation chamber. The Kim dynasty has effectively set up an alternate reality for its citizens, a bubble in which the regime is both protector and provider, and the rest of the planet is a flaming dumpster of suffering, violence, and starvation. Within that bubble, the idea of revolution loses any allure because, as far as most North Koreans know, there is no viable elsewhere or better system to compare with. From the moment a North Korean child can read, they are inundated with propaganda about living in the greatest nation on earth. In school, they learn that South Koreans are starving beggars under American occupation. State media insists that the outside world is full of crime, inequality, and misery. Meanwhile, their country is a socialist paradise envied by the world. Of course, this is a grotesque inversion of reality, but how would they know? Internet access for regular citizens? Zero. Foreign media? Banned. Even the radios have been physically welded to the government frequency. Travel abroad is practically impossible for you commoners. Even free interaction with foreigners inside North Korea is non-existent. The average North Korean will live and die without a candid conversation with someone from outside. The regime goes to extraordinary lengths to keep its people in the dark about life beyond its borders. Imagine growing up in a sealed dome, where you're told that every other place outside the dome has it worse, or has been destroyed, or is full of demons, or is a nuclear wasteland. You're hungry and miserable sometimes, sure, but you believe it's even more horrible out there. Or at least, you're not sure what's out there, and that uncertainty is terrifying. For many years, North Koreans genuinely believed that Americans were plotting to invade any day, that South Korea was an impoverished hellscape, and that their suffering was caused by external threats or sanctions, not by the regime's failures. If you accept that narrative, then revolting against the regime makes no sense. It would be like burning down your house in the middle of a storm. You know, it's a twisted form of learned helplessness on a national scale. The Kim regime's survival strategy has always been to control information at all costs. This information blockade is arguably its most powerful weapon. As long as North Koreans don't realize how badly they're being screwed, they're less likely to risk their lives for change. As our dear scholar Andrei Lankov observed, if the North Korean masses ever learned about the true prosperity of their South Korean cousins, and if they became less afraid of the government's wrath, they would do what East Germans once did: demand change and unification on better terms. That is precisely why the regime works so hard to prevent that knowledge. In East Germany, exposure to Western TV and the evident contrast in living standards were catalysts for the people's uprising. North Korea has striven to prevent a similar scenario by keeping its people in an info vacuum. Kim Jong-un may have his finger on nuclear buttons, but just as importantly, he has his other fingers firmly pressed on the mute button, silencing any truth from leaking in. Now, it's true that in the last 20 years or so, cracks have appeared in this iron curtain of information. The devastating famine of the 1990s, ironically, forced North Koreans to engage in illegal market activities to survive, which brought in a trickle of outside info. In recent years, smuggled South Korean dramas on USB sticks, illegal Chinese cell phones near the border, and word of mouth from defectors' relatives have given some North Koreans a peek at life beyond their borders. Watching some K-pop music videos or a Hollywood film, and an average North Korean would think, "Hey, life in South Korea looks pretty decent," or "Americans don't actually appear to be baby-eating monsters." The regime is very aware of this dangerous outside influence and has cracked down hard in recent years, deploying special units to hunt down foreign DVDs, imprisoning people for watching K-dramas, and tightening border security to stop the flow of any digital device. High schoolers are encouraged to spy on each other and report anyone humming any South Korean pop melody. Then, 2 of them will be forced into some re-education programs. Despite these efforts, enough information has seeped in that many North Koreans do harbor private doubts. Especially among younger generations in border regions, some surely know South Korea is rich and a free democracy. But here's the catch. Those individuals often choose an individual solution, also known as defection, rather than collective action. If you're a North Korean who figures out the outside world is better, what's less suicidal? Sneaking across the border to freedom, or trying to start a revolution at home? The sane and reasonable choice is to run, not rebel. Therefore, the 1990s famine saw a spike in defections, not a coordinated uprising. Even today, those disillusioned few who gain outside info tend to either keep their head down and just live a quiet double life, and then eventually attempt escape if the opportunity arises. They don't rally their neighbors to storm the local party office. That would be a death sentence for the whole family, and they know it. It's telling that the most serious anti-regime organization in recent years, Free Joseon, is actually run by defectors and exiles outside North Korea. Inside the country, organized resistance is virtually non-existent. In short, North Koreans have been deliberately kept ignorant of alternatives and fearful of the unknown. The reality is, when you're trapped in a bubble, revolt isn't on your mind. It's all about survival. And even if you peek outside the bubble and realize it might be better elsewhere, your best bet is to get out, not try to pop the bubble from within. It's the devil you know versus an angel you're not even sure exists. Under those circumstances, is there any lunatic going to light the torch of revolution?
Under the leadership of Kim Jong-un, can we expect to see some sort of reforms within the North Korean society?
Minor reforms, probably yes. Major reforms, definitely not. Has South Korea not existed? North Korea would probably started reforms long time ago. They probably would have started reforms in the 70s. The problem is, if North Korea starts reforms, North Korean people, first of all, learn about South Korean prosperity. Second, they will become less afraid of the government because of the unavoidable political relaxation.
Fear alone may cow a population, but the Kims didn't stop there. They took a step further to make people worship them. In North Korea, the ruling family isn't just a generational authoritarian crime syndicate. The Kims are demigods. We're talking about a full-blown cult of personality that pervades every aspect of life, every thought from cradle to grave. The Kim regime isn't content with you obeying them. They demand that you love them, with a reverence usually reserved for deities or one's own parents. This transforms the act of rebellion from merely a crime into a kind of blasphemy. It's one thing to overthrow a tyrant, and it's another type of business to revolt against someone you've been taught to be the source of all goodness and the object of your deepest devotion. North Korea's leader worship is perhaps the most pervasive in human history. The founding president, Kim Il-sung, is literally called the Eternal President, which means he remains the official president even decades after his death, like a patron saint of the nation. His son, Kim Jong-il, was the dear leader, now embalmed and displayed in a palace mausoleum like a god king. Kim Jong-un continues the tradition, complete with fanciful legends about his prowess. Everywhere you go in North Korea, portraits of the Kims gaze down at you, in every home, every classroom, every subway station. huge bronze statues of Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il dominate city squares. Citizens are required to bow to them and lay flowers on their birthdays or on special occasions such as the wedding day. Children learn to literally pray to Father Kim Jong-un for the food they're going to eat and the clothes they wear. These are rituals of this national personality cult. By hijacking the language of family and religion, the regime plants itself in the deepest emotional core of each person. The leader is the father, general, the national savior and benevolent soul. Defying him isn't just treason, but a form of sacrilege, an attack on the very identity and emotional security of the indoctrinated individual. The regime's propaganda and indoctrination are relentless and start from day one. In kindergarten, kids sing songs titled, "We Have Nothing to Envy in the World," and odes to Kim Il-sung's endless love. They learn that the Kims can do no wrong, have almost supernatural wisdom, and love the people more than their own mothers do. School curricula include the 10 principles for a monolithic ideology, basically the 10 commandments of Kim worship, which every citizen must memorize and internalize in their hearts. These principles demand absolute loyalty, and even instruct that the Kims must be regarded with filial piety. So on one hand, fear enforces reverence. On the other, sincere indoctrination instills reverence. The result is a peculiar mix. Many North Koreans genuinely revere their leaders to some extent, especially in older generations, while the rest at least pretend to, with fanatical zeal, because anything less is dangerously suspicious. The Kim cult often crosses into outright mythology. The state propaganda machine has propagated far-fetched legends, like they once claimed Kim Jong-il was born on a sacred mountain under a double rainbow, that he learned to walk at 3 weeks old and talk at 8 weeks, and that as an adult he penned 1,500 books in 3 years. They asserted he invented the hamburger, though literally called double bread with meat in Pyongyang, and that he could control the weather with his mood. Perhaps most famously, they boasted that Kim Jong-il shot a 38 under par round of golf, including 5 holes in one, the very first time he picked up a golf club. They said Kim Il-sung had a magical power called Chukjibop, essentially teleportation, during his guerrilla days, until recently, when state media awkwardly admitted, "Actually, folks, our eternal president couldn't teleport after all. I guess those propaganda officers watched too much X-Men." As for Kim Jong-un, rumors in state media had him able to drive a car at age 3. These stories sound ridiculous to us, but in North Korea, many were taught as fact. They serve a clear purpose: to make the Kims superhuman in the public mind. A population raised to believe their leader is basically a wizard or anointed by heaven is not likely to grab pitchforks against him. Even when some of these myths strain credulity, the emotional truth remains. The Kims are seen as the heart of the nation. The depth of indoctrination was on display in 2011, when Kim Jong-il died. We all saw videos of North Koreans hysterically weeping in queues under heavy snow. Some of that was performative to look less suspicious, but many tears were a real product of lifelong brainwashing. People genuinely felt lost, as if their own father had died, because that's exactly how the propaganda frames the relationship. Yes, the regime that starves and oppresses them is also sold to them as their loving guardian. And some North Koreans likely feel both resentment and attachment to the leader, much like an abused child who still loves the abusive parent because that's all they know. Since the regime is sacred, rebellion became a form of moral damnation, a religious heresy. So, many would rather endure suffering than live with the shame of disloyalty. Now, of course, not everyone is a true believer. Ever since the Ardus March, more North Koreans have become jaded. Empty stomachs can breed doubt about the dear leader's love. Some quietly see through the propaganda. But even if you don't personally feel the Kim family is divine, you must act as you do, or else. And you know that most of your compatriots will not join you in sacrilege. The cult atmosphere means that any open dissent will be met not only with state violence, but with social outrage from loyal citizens. Finally, consider how this cult of personality fills the ideological space that might otherwise be occupied by revolutionary ideas. In other words, the Kim worship is a competitor to any hypothetical freedom movement. It's hard to rally people around abstract ideas of democracy or human rights when their emotions and devotion are dominated by the affection and the fear of the leader. The regime has smartly made everything personal. Loyalty isn't to a party or any abstract idea, it's to Kim himself. In the socialist Kimdom, they have successfully replaced communism and Marxism with Kim Il-sungism. There is no ism higher than the leader's will. Thus, North Koreans don't ask themselves, is our system good, in a vacuum? They ask, am I loyal to our great leader? Therefore, the Kim dynasty's rule rests not only on the fear of punishment, but on a deep-seated culture of veneration. It's one part Stalin, one part Jesus. This dual status, feared dictator and beloved God, has insulated them from revolt in a way pure terror might not. Like any religious group, breaking those bonds requires an emotional and cognitive upheaval that is hard to achieve on a mass scale, especially under lockdown. So long as the sacred aura of the Kims persists in North Korean society, revolt remains an almost profane thought. The regime is your big brother, as well as your big brother-in-law, big daddy, and big deity. Hard to rebel against all that, isn't it?
크게 말할 수도 있지만 저는 항상 힘든 일을 겪을 때면은 백두산을 먼저 생각합니다. 저에게서 이렇게 실력이 한심하게 나온다든지 아니면은 이렇게 가정상 힘든 일이 제기될 때도 항상 정업대학 학생으로서 항상 영남산과 함께 백두산을 마음에 안고 삽니다.
If all the above weren't enough, the fear, the mistrust, the isolation, the brainwashing, there's another brutally simple factor keeping North Koreans from revolting: hunger. It turns out that when you're chronically malnourished, plotting a revolution is not high on your to-do list. Hard to storm the barricades when you can barely stand up. The Kim regime, through a mix of mismanagement and cynical policy, has kept a large portion of the population in survival mode for decades, and a starving, exhausted populace is not a revolutionary populace. North Korea's leadership might not publicly admit it, but the lack of food has been wielded as a weapon, a means of punishing and weakening any potential opposition, and of rewarding loyalty. Let's start with the stark reality. North Korea has experienced famine and persistent food shortages on a scale few modern nations have seen. During the infamous Arduous March famine after the collapse of the Soviet Union, anywhere from 240,000 to several million North Koreans died of starvation. Imagine, up to 15% of the population perished with an empty belly. That's apocalyptic. Many outside observers at the time assumed that surely such misery would ignite unrest or topple the regime. But it didn't. Why? Partly because, as we've seen, people were too isolated and scared to coordinate any response. Also, those who might have considered rebelling simply did not have the strength. During the famine, people were reduced to eating grass, tree bark, and worse. Masses wandered the countryside like walking skeletons, or simply sat listlessly waiting for death. In such conditions, the very concept of political action becomes a luxury. All mental and physical energy is consumed by the search for calories. The famine actually saw instances of social breakdown below the level of politics, theft, food riots in some areas, even reported cases of cannibalism in desperation, but not organized rebellion. It's grim, but think about it. Starving people don't form protest committees. They're more likely to fight each other over scraps than unite to overthrow the government. The regime, safe in Pyongyang with the military well fed, waited out the famine and then doubled down on repression. And those who survived were traumatized and weaker than ever. The famine did impose a huge risk to regime stability, but the dear leader managed it shrewdly from an authoritarian standpoint. They prioritized resources to the ruling elites and military when food was scarce, deliberately leaving millions of ordinary citizens to fend for themselves. In other words, the people who helped the regime in power got the rations. The politically marginal rural masses bore the brunt of starvation. That's a cold but effective calculus. Since the army stayed strong, they were used to keep order and stop any unrest that did flicker up. It's telling that throughout the famine, the security apparatus remained intact and brutally efficient at quashing any hint of riot. The North Korean government has used food distribution as a carrot and stick device. In better times, the public distribution system hands out food rations, but usually not enough to live on, and often only reliably to those in favored cities or industries. If you're loyal and useful, you might get your full ration. If not, oops, looks like the rations didn't arrive this month, and the officers can do nothing about it. Food is a weapon of punishment and population control. For example, in the prison camps, guards would withhold prisoners' food as collective punishment for minor infractions. On the larger scale, regions or groups seen as disloyal got less food. Hunger also keeps people busy. When the state can't feed everyone, North Koreans have to hustle in black markets, scrape up wild foods, or engage in petty trade just to survive. Since the late 90s, much of the population lives in a semi-market reality, selling homemade goods, bartering, smuggling, all technically illegal, but often tolerated because the state knows it can't provide all of that. Besides, this occupies people's time and wastes their energy. You spend 12 hours a day trying to earn a few won to buy rice on the market, then stand in line 3 more hours to collect a little state ration. After this daily routine, who has the time to plot a revolution? When you're just trying to figure out your next meal, politics is a distant concern. That's what the regime counts on. An old saying goes, "Revolution is not made on an empty stomach." Well, North Korean stomachs have been kept quite empty. Conversely, when do people historically rebel? Often after their situation improves a little and expectations rise, or when a normally reliable source of sustenance suddenly disappears in a way that clearly enrages them. In North Korea's case, starvation was protracted and normalized. Famines are framed as heroic sacrifices and caused by evil outsiders. And because the famine killed off possibly 1 million troublemakers, sorry for calling them this way, and taught survivors to be even more fearful and dependent, it strangely left the regime more secure. The regime never paid for its failures. It just shifted the burden onto the people, who died in droves or figured out how to cope in the new, grimmer normal. To this day, food insecurity remains chronic. Even recent UN reports estimate that roughly 45% of North Korea's population is undernourished, which is around 12 million people not getting enough to eat. Nearly half the country is hungry right now. That's not exactly fertile ground for organizing a rebellion. It's awful from a humanitarian standpoint, but from the regime's cynical perspective, a population that is struggling to survive is not plotting insurrection. Before the newly founded friendship with Russia, Kim Jong-un even warned of a new, arduous march, implicitly asking people to bear more hunger for the motherland. By casting starvation as a patriotic struggle rather than a failure of governance, they redirect people's frustration outward or into stoic acceptance. Those who grumble too loudly, "Why don't we have food?" risk being branded unfaithful. The regime essentially holds the people hostage with their own needs. Don't rebel and you get a little to eat, otherwise you'll all starve completely. Finally, hunger has eroded community bonds and any capacity for collective action. In North Korean society, the famine years saw trust in neighbors sometimes dissolve as people stole to survive. It's hard to organize with your fellow man when you are craving each other's food. The social fabric was torn by hunger, and the regime likes it that way. To be clear, the North Korean government didn't invent hunger just to quash rebellion. The famine was also caused by economic mismanagement, loss of Soviet aid, natural disasters, and later international sanctions. But once starvation set in, the regime leveraged it to reinforce power. They let the useless mouths perish and ensured the loyal core survived. And today, rather than truly reforming agriculture or opening up to enough aid that would make the populace food secure, they tolerate a level of underfeeding that keeps people occupied and weak. It's brutal, but effective. Food, or the denial of it, is the invisible shackle on the North Korean people, one that chains them to immediate needs and wards off thoughts of revolution. Looking at all the pieces together, the answer is bleak but simple. North Koreans don't revolt because the system is expertly built to make revolt nearly impossible. Trust has been poisoned. Civil society doesn't exist. History offers no examples. Outside information is blocked. The regime is portrayed as both divine and indispensable. And above all, most people are just too exhausted, hungry, and scared to imagine anything different. Any one of these factors alone would make life difficult for would-be revolutionaries. Combined, they create a populace that is disconnected, disempowered, and dominated. The Kim regime has spent 3 generations tightening every bolt in this machine of control. It's not that North Koreans are somehow uniquely content with tyranny. Far from it. It's that dissent has been systematically choked off at every turn. We outsiders, sitting in relative freedom, might fantasize. If I were there, I'd rise up. But in truth, if you were born and raised in that system, starved, scared, lied to, indoctrinated, you likely wouldn't, just like all other North Koreans. You'd do what almost everyone there does. Try to get by. Maybe curse your rulers under your breath when no one's around, but ultimately play along. Because the cost of open defiance is certain death, and the chance of success is virtually zero. It's a rational calculation when you're inside the devil's arena with no exit. That said, history has a way of surprising us. No regime is eternal, and cracks can eventually form even in the hardest walls. North Korea's control apparatus, while formidable, is not infallible. Information is seeping in bit by bit. Market forces have given people a taste of autonomy, and even the cult of personality may not hypnotize everyone like it used to. If someday the right combination of events occurred, say, a power struggle at the top, a collapse of the economy beyond even the regime's ability to manage, and an awakening of popular consciousness thanks to outside information, then perhaps North Koreans could find space to push for change. One day, the North Korean people may find their chains loosened through internal cracks or external influences, and when that day comes, we might finally see the sparks of revolt catch fire. But until then, The uncomfortable answer to our question is, North Koreans don't revolt because their reality has been engineered to make revolt simply impossible. It's not hope that keeps the Kim dynasty in power, but hopelessness. And the only hope they have is for the benevolence of the leader.